Welcome back to Squawk Alley. Veterans of streaming, offering some advice to newer players in the space in a new article titled 10 Lessons for Disney, Apple, and all the new streaming companies trying to take down Netflix. We're joined by one of the co-authors, Alex Kruglov, former head of content acquisition at Hulu. Alex, thanks for joining us today. It's quite an op-ed you've written here, very instructive. Sort of the big headline here is getting a subscriber and keeping a subscriber is the focus, and that the second is harder, much harder. Explain that to us.
Yeah, if you think about a subscription business, essentially you have two jobs and only two jobs. One is to get somebody to subscribe, and the second is to get somebody to not unsubscribe. And to get somebody to not unsubscribe is hard, especially if you're giving somebody a free trial or a free month or an extended opportunity to sort of sample something. Getting somebody to take out their wallet on a monthly basis and to continue renewing that subscription is very, very tricky. So the numbers to watch for is not just the net adds, which is a really impressive and important metric, especially for somebody like the Walt Disney Company, but it's also how long are the users sticking around and how much engagement are you really seeing from them.
You mentioned at a certain point that the value of unwatched content is negative, not zero. What do you mean by that?
Well, you've probably heard the expression Netflix and chill. I mean, the idea there is it's come from this tongue-in-cheek concept that you turn it on and you don't quite know what to look for. And Netflix has actually done an amazing job of discovery and of surfacing content that you like. But fundamentally, if you open up an offering and there's a lot there and there's not much that you want to watch, sometimes the bulk of what's there, especially if it's secondary or tertiary content, actually makes you think the service is worse than if there is a small amount of stuff there, but it's the stuff you actually want to watch.
Alex, you argue in this piece that data doesn't really matter as much to these services in terms of informing how they create content as at first Netflix, for example, led us to believe. That suggests to me that Netflix is in big trouble. If they don't have a data advantage, Disney certainly has a library advantage. Some of these other companies do. Are they just supposed to be smarter internationally? Or how can they, aside from spending tons and tons of money, win long term?
Well, so there are two distinct elements of data and analytics. When it comes to product and usage, data and artificial intelligence is crucial as far as content discovery, content recommendation, you name it. When it comes to greenlighting and making content, fundamentally, the Hollywood ecosystem has actually been using data for decades and decades and decades. And in many ways, the story that Netflix and others told Wall Street around using data to select scenes and to cast was primarily a narrative that was a sales narrative rather than a real story. So when it comes to making content, you absolutely can identify the users for whom you want to make content. But good programming is mostly a judgment call. To answer your question about Netflix's advantage, they have many, many years of advantage as far as how people navigate their environment and what people choose to watch. So as a result, they know what to license and they also know what to make. They don't necessarily know how to tell the best story using data, but they absolutely know which stories to tell and which stories not to tell.
But Alex, I mean, Hollywood's data collection in decades past is ridiculous. It's so rudimentary, right? I mean, what was it beyond focus groups asking you, would you go see X? Now they can tell not just what you would see, but how long you would see it for.
That's absolutely true. Although I would argue that, it's funny because having been inside of one of these companies, I would argue that the way in which traditional Hollywood parses data is actually quite impressive in terms of knowing where in the segments people are watching, what the retention rate in live TV is. And you know this because you look at the data with your live viewership. So there is more data. So there's certainly more access to information. But when it comes to what story makes sense, the data doesn't necessarily tell the picture. A great example of that is the first hit that Netflix had. The first true hit was Orange is the New Black. And this was a show that starred people that were not familiar to the audiences. It took place in a prison, and most people were wearing orange jumpsuits. No data could have told them in advance that that show was going to be a hit. The reason it connected was because it spoke to a demographic that they knew to go after, and it was a really well-told story that was novel and fresh and different. Fleabag, same thing when it comes to Amazon.